Hello, welcome to another episode of Becoming Competitive. This is going to be a slightly shorter episode, but one a few folks have asked me about, so figure we'll go ahead and talk about it. And it's going to be beating the meta. So, and by the way, just because I'm super happy of it and I don't really have anything flashy to put up there, you're getting full screen me. Not because of my beautiful face, but because of this beautiful, there it is, Lego Star Destroyer I just built, and it's the coolest thing I own. So just look at that in the background. Revel in its glory. And yes, that is an epic X-Wing ship beside it, just for comparison. But, beating the meta. In order to beat the meta, you first got to know what the meta is. Now, I'm not going to go into the current meta, because it doesn't matter. But, there's a lot of great tools to learn what the meta is. The first is, what are your locals playing? Because I know a lot of folks say, well, my local meta is so different from the actual meta. And that's true to a certain extent, but typically, at least from what I've seen, everyone's local meta seems to represent a piece or a slice of the overall meta. And what I mean by that is, what your guys are playing locally, especially the guys that are winning a lot, what they're playing is probably a sliver of the overall meta that just happens to dominate in your little local area. So look at what the top 2 or 3 guys are playing. Make note of that. Now, if you've only got an 8-person community, maybe it doesn't apply as much. But I'm lucky I've got like 30 to 40 players that play within an hour of me. So I can kind of look and see, oh, okay, I'm seeing these 2 lists do pretty well whenever one of the 4 players I know is really good takes it out and just wrecks with it. Cool. So take note of that. Like, don't discount your local meta, because your local meta is going to tell you a piece of the overall meta. The next thing is you got MetaWing. Go on there. I've looked at it in other episodes. Look at MetaWing. Just go through, see what lists are winning tournaments. Look at the last, 3 or 4 tournaments with over 100 people in the last, month or 2. And just go through the top 16. What lists are you seeing pop up more than once? That's the meta. Make note of that. And then listen to podcasts. I'm not going to talk about the current meta, but there's tons of podcasts out there that they just go down the meta and talk about it all day. It's a great tool. Utilize it. That's what they're there for. So, those are the 3 ways I've historically looked at the meta. Now, with 2.0, to me, there's a 4th element to the meta that is actually meta now that never was before. So, and that's going to be your random jank. So in 1.0, I was really intent on, all right, my list needs to be able to beat the meta, and it needs to be able to get through the random jank into the meta. And by that I mean, all right, if I'm going to go to a tournament, if I win my first 3 games and I get to 4-0 in Swiss, more than likely all the lists I'm going to play against from then on out are going to be top tier lists, right? Because it's hard to go 3-0. Only 1 in 8 people are going to do it. So if you can do that, generally you'll get out of like, I've never even seen this list. What the hell does this thing do? Why does this guy have a ship I haven't seen in a year? So used to, you would, if you just won 3 games in a row, you'd be good. Or if you managed to go 3-1, you'd be out of that meta, or you'd be out of the random jank phase. Well, what I think is refreshing about 2.0 is with the 7 different factions and the whole distribution of people are playing everything, and everything's pretty well represented. Random jank probably shouldn't be called random jank anymore, just random mediocre to above average stuff. Because of how much diversity is out there, you're going to hit so much more stuff that I would classify as random jank in the 4-0 bracket, in the 4-1, the 5-0s. Like, that stuff is actually making tournament cuts now. So it's really important that not only do you have a list that's catered to beating, the top tier lists that you hear about all the time, but it is also an all comers list in that it can just go against most things well. And the reason I bring this up is when I first became a competitive player, when I first started going to regionals and trying to do well, I made a mistake in the fact that I would tech purely against the meta, and I would ignore the random jank. And the funny thing was, going 3-0 was the hardest thing for me to do. I had so much trouble winning my first 3 games against, I don't want to say lower tier players, but the reality is, if you're a top tier player that's gonna, average, you average 5-1 in Swiss. That is your average result. A 4-2 is not good for you. Once you get to that level where you're expecting a 5-1, the reality is you're winning your first 3 games almost always, just for the simple fact that you're getting paired against folks that are generally going 2-4, 3-3, 1-5. Occasionally you'll hit that other top tier player and you guys will have a brawl in round 2, and that sucks to do it. But the reality is you're going to be hitting a lot more of the middle of the pack type players. And I'm not being disparaging towards them, but if you're a 5-1 averaging player, you should beat them on a fairly consistent basis. Well, I was finding that I was having trouble beating the players I should beat because my list was so specialized and so teched out to beat the meta that against just random stuff, it didn't hold up well. Like, there were just things, like entire categories of lists that the meta kind of pushed out, but that didn't mean people weren't going to bring them to the tournament and just be happy going 3-3. And the problem is, if I hit them in round 2, it's like, God, this match is so hard. So remember, your list needs to be able to beat the entire field and do well against the meta. So, and I think the random jank element has really gotten to the point now where we're seeing every single tournament now. We're seeing lists where people are like, that's cool. That's a cool ship and it made the top 16. That's a cool ship and it made the top 8. I mean, at Nationals, there was Aggressor in the top 4. Like, an Aggressor. One of the worst ships in 2.0, top 4. So, you're starting to see a lot more of the periphery fringe stuff becoming better. And the reason for that is the variable points. So things are being balanced constantly. So a lot more stuff has a chance to be good. So when your list, what you got to do to win is you have to beat the random stuff. And since the random stuff has become so much more a part of the true meta, because in 1.0 I would say random jank might have made up, let's say, less than 10% of a cut. So top 16, random jank, you're just going down the list, the top 16 list, and you're like, what the hell is that doing there? I would say that made up less than 10% of cuts in 1.0. In 2.0, I'd say that's probably making 30% of cuts, where you're just looking and go, that's unique. Didn't think to see that ship here. Okay, that's a new ship. So now the random jank to me is a staple of the current meta. And this will change maybe eventually, but I think with the variable points costs going up and down, random jank is now a thing that'll stay in the meta. And it might vary from 20% to 40% depending on what the new hotness is and how good it is against everything. But I think random jank is here to stay in the meta, which I think is healthy for the game. So you need to be able to beat your random jank, especially now, because in order to go 5-0, 6-0, 5-1, in order to make these good runs in Swiss and make cuts and get good seeds and that kind of stuff, guess what? You got to win your first 2 or 3 games. And that could be against anybody. You could get matched against Paul Heaver round 1. And then round 2, you could get matched against the kid that's only been playing a week, but he got matched against the kid that bought the set yesterday, so he won his game, is 1-0, and now you're playing him. So round 1, you beat Paul Heaver, and then round 2, you're playing this kid that has been playing the game for 2 weeks. That's what the first 3 rounds look like sometimes. It's like the variability of the skill levels is just ridiculous. But if you're able to go 3-0 and you start getting into those 4-0 games, that's when you start just seeing a look, kind of a leveling out of the skill. In the first 3 games of tournaments, I think I've started out 3-0, ignoring regionals in major tournaments. I think I've started out 3-0. I've started out 4-0 in the last 4 major tournaments I've played. I started out 4-0. And the thing I've noticed is once you hit that 1-0, 2-0, 3-0, you just kind of look around and it's a lot of random players. You'll see some folks you know or whatnot, but as soon as I hit 4-0, the field has shrunk enough that all of a sudden I'm looking to the left and right and my opponent, and it's like, okay, I know you, I know you, I know you. You guys are all players that are consistently shoulder to shoulder with me throughout these tournaments at the end. And that's because you're starting to start playing against the same good players all the time. So you need to beat that random jank so you can get into that little bubble of top meta lists. And then you got to beat the meta. So when I say beat the meta, I don't necessarily mean crush every single list in the meta. Especially now. We've got 7 factions. So say, what's it called? First Order. Only good meta list is, now this is not true, but let's say the only good meta list in First Order is Tabzin, Kylo, Quickdraw. Like, that's a hot list right now, at least for First Order. Let's say that's the only good list in First Order. And so if you run into First Order late in a tournament, that's probably what it's going to be. However, you looked at the last 3 months of major events, and you looked at, say, 6 major events with like 100 plus people. And First Order only had, say, out of those 8 tournaments, they had, let's say, 12 lists in the top 16. Because First Order, in this hypothetical meta, hasn't been doing that great. So out of 8 tournaments, they had 12 total appearances in the top 16. Now, out of those 12 appearances, 10 of them were Tabzin, Kylo, Quickdraw. So we're pretty sure if we run into a FO list, it'll be that. But that's 10 out of 160 lists. We're talking about 7% of the field in the cut is Kylo, Tabzin, Quickdraw. So if that's a not good matchup for us, like not even a hard counter, just like say we're a slight underdog. We're a 40-60 in that matchup. It's not a good matchup. We look across the table and we get sad when we see it. But it's not terrible. But it only represents 7% of the cut. Am I really that worried about losing to that? Not really. Especially if my list does, say I've got an 80% win rate against random. And then against the entire rest of the meta, I've got a 75% win rate. But then against that specific list, I'm a 40% win rate. So let's say 30% of the meta is random jank, and I'm 80% against that. Cool. I'm doing good there. And then 30%, what's math? 63% of the meta is actual meta lists, and I do pretty good. 75% against all those. And then we get to the FOs, First Order, where I'm an underdog. You know what? I'm willing to take those odds. Because the reality is, I'm only going to get 4 games in a top 16. If I make the top 16, I'm only going to possibly play 4 games. I've got a 93% chance each game to just not hit FO. And if FO, well, that's not true math, obviously. But in the first round, I've got a 93% chance of not hitting it. Really slightly less than that, but whatever. But if I don't hit it in the first round, awesome. If it loses in the first round, I don't even have to worry about it after that. But if it makes it to the second round, that sucks. But the reality is the odds of me hitting it are pretty low. And it's not worth taking a list that just is a 70% win rate against everything when I can go 80, 75, and then 40 against a very small part of the meta. So that's just a thing to keep in mind. Just because you have a bad matchup, you got to look at the meta. Now, if that particular list is making up 20% of the cut, now you might have a problem. But 7%? Not a big deal, right? So keep that in mind. And then, and this is an interesting thing, what your list, and this is maybe should go in a practice video, but I want to mention it here because it is a meta related. So what your list needs to do to beat the meta is, one, you got to play against all the meta. So I would basically go down the factions and I'd be like, all right, Empire, they fly aces. Aces are big, and then there's some swarm stuff right now. Can I beat those two? Yes. Have I played enough games to know I can reliably do that? I've played against 4 ace lists. I did fine. I've played against 3 jousty lists. I did fine. Cool. We're good there. Next one. Resistance. I'm having trouble against resistance. Don't know why. I need practice there. Go to the next one. And do that for all of them. Every faction. And then it's like, cool. So it's resistance and separatists that I need practice against. So how do I learn to beat those meta lists? Well, the first thing I'm going to do personally, if I'm having a lot of trouble against those, is I'm going to find the best player I know that is willing to do this with me. And I'm going to be like, hey, can you fly my list 2 or 3 times against me? And I'm going to fly the meta list that's kicking my ass. If you're having trouble against, say, Sunfac and 6 bugs, whatever they call it, droids. Sunfac and 6 droids, you're having trouble against that. So get the best player that will practice with you, give him your list that you've been practicing with, and you fly Sunfac and the 6 bugs 2 or 3 times. Not more. There's no reason to go really past that, but fly it 2 or 3 times and figure out what is that list scared of going against your list. After you play it 2 or 3 times, switch and do it again 2 or 3 times. And hopefully by that point, it'll give you enough chances to figure out, okay, this is where that list is weak. This is what I need to do. This is my best chance to win. Now, you may still be a losing matchup, but maybe you go from a 20% win rate to a 40% win rate. That's a big deal. So keep that in mind. But as far as beating the meta goes, figure out what it is. Make sure your list is capable of A, beating the meta, and B, beating the random jank. Because your list has to be able to take all comers. Because you're never going to get a guaranteed, this. I'm only going to hit meta lists. I know it's going to happen. Because I've teched that way before and it doesn't work. Trust me, it doesn't work. So just keep that in mind and I think you'll be okay. Beating the meta, once you break it down, is actually not that difficult. And if you can't figure out how to beat the meta, this is probably the gem of the video, to be honest. So if you got this far, congratulations. If you can't figure out how to beat the meta, pick a meta list and play it. That's it. Just steal one of the best lists, play it. Because guess what? It's in the meta for a reason. Anyway, you guys have a good one. Become competitive.